Well, hello, Very Bold Radio and Podcast. Steve Teel here. Look at your screen. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you see two of my favorite people in the world, and honestly, a lot of people's favorite people. My mom and dad, Ken and Barbara Teel, are joining me from Amarillo. How are you today?
We're doing all right, honey. How are you?
We're very well. Thank you, Steve.
Well, I'm doing great because it really is a blessing to talk to you guys, but also I just want to tell our listeners up front, we're going to be sharing a story that we've been sharing for many years in different places, different ways. Mom, you've shared this. Dad, you've shared this. And I've shared this, this powerful story. I am talking to a man today on the phone, my dad, who honestly, if it wasn't for God intervening and if it wasn't for the prayers of his saints and his children, very young children, if it wasn't for people answering God's call, God saying, you need to pray for Ken Teel, for Kenny Teel. You need to pray for that man that you saw on TV who is in a war in Vietnam. And if it wasn't for God and wasn't for those prayers, we would not be talking to my dad today. So I give thanks and praise to God, and I give thanks to the people of God who answered God's call to pray. And so for me, we're going to have kind of three different perspectives on this story, but I will tell you this, and I'm sure my dad will argue or whatever, but my dad is absolutely a Vietnam War hero. And I want to read something that my mom wrote, and then my mom will have a perspective on what it was like stateside. My dad will walk us through some of his experiences that he's able to talk about with Vietnam. And then I want to tell you also, thanks to Mom and Dad, you're going to hear about some of the survivors, the couple of survivors that were with Dad at the end of this story. And we're going to talk to one of them, Bill Jankowski, on Saturday. So that'll be coming up in a podcast as well. And he'll have a perspective not only on that, but some other experiences and talk about his faith. So I'm really excited. Now, this is what I want to read just to give you a little bit of what was happening in 1972. That means I was 6 years old. And I just want to say this, if my dad wasn't here today, which he should not be, thank you, Lord Jesus. Thank you, people of God who pray and who obey, who listen to God. Thank you. My only two memories that I can remember of my dad from that age, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else, is one during this time, and you'll hear more about it. There was a Vietnam War correspondent that did a couple of stories with Dad right there, and Mom can talk about watching that. But what I do remember is I remember going, of course, this is long before DVRs and VCRs and all that stuff, so we watched it together, and I remember watching it. At least I believe that's a real memory. I can't tell for sure if that one is one that I've created, because what I remember is at 2806 East 27th Street. Maybe we're somewhere else. Maybe I just remember that old TV. But what I remember for sure is what we did after is we went down to the Tulsa TV station, and never been in a TV station, and we were able to watch it again. And I just have a vague memory of that, but that is a memory that is never changed. And what I can tell you is, I mean, that would be it for what I would know, other than hearing stories about my dad and all those things. And we will, of course, touch on later. Please understand, God did intervene, but I know for a lot of people's lives, God did not intervene in a miraculous way to save them. And you're going to hear some of that. And what we want to see in those situations is that God is so big, and we understand that's devastating it would have been devastating for me, just as you're going to hear about someone named Lauren who did lose her dad. But what we want to see is God at work, the God of glory, who's bigger when he does intervene with these powerful yeses that we're excited about, and we give testimonies like I do. But we also want to see him at work in those times when he doesn't say yes. It's not our yes anyway, and God is still at work, and he's in for the long haul, and he's in for the long game. And so we're still looking for God to bring glory out of those situations. So I recognize that there are people listening that might say, well, that's great, that God answered your prayer, but a lot of people were praying for my dad, and God didn't say yes to them. So I want you to know you're in our prayers today, and I know that God is with you, and I know that God takes the deepest hurt and the biggest pain, the things that we don't understand, and he walks right up to us and he puts his arm around us and he says, I know and I love you. And I just think about in John chapter 11, I just think about Jesus weeping. John 11:35, Jesus wept even though he knew he was going to call Lazarus back to life. So he's the God who cares. And even if you're still angry at God today, he just comes up. And if you're so angry that you can't let Jesus put his arm around your shoulder, he'll just sit there and give you a little bit of space. But he's with you. He can weep with you. He does weep with you. And he will bring glory to his name. So I pray that that's what you see, because that's what Jesus wants to reveal. So I want to read my mom's words, actually. This is from the story that you put together many years ago, and I found it again and updated it in 2018. But I believe you put this together, Mom, when we first did the Pray Before You Play rally in San Antonio. And for the website Pray Before You Play at the time, I wanted something that said prayer works. And this, for me, has always been one of the strongest testimonies of how God will sometimes answer with an amazing, resounding yes. And so I just want to read these words before we get into it that my mom wrote. She said this, just so you get a little picture of what my dad was facing and what my mom was facing here stateside, and what at 6 years old, I don't know what I was comprehending or feeling, but certainly a lot of people were praying, and a lot of people praying. So my mom wrote this: on April 20th, 1972, Walter Cronkite informed the nation of the latest development in North Vietnam's Easter offensive in the exact area where my dad was. Which, do you say Dong Ha? How do you say that?
That's correct, Dong Ha.
Dong Ha Quang Tri. And my mom writes, he concluded his alarming, this is Walter Cronkite still, he concluded his alarming and negative report with the news that the U.S. military was air evacuating American advisors trapped with South Vietnamese troops in Quang Tri. Then Walter Cronkite said this, but some of the Americans were refusing to desert their Vietnamese troops and would fight to the death. So that's what we're talking about a little bit, and we're talking about God's glory. Dad, can you please, if you're able to, just tell us what you were thinking when you received or heard the orders that you were to evacuate? And obviously you said no. I mean, what were you experiencing, and tell us why you said no, as other American advisors did as well.
I was an advisor with two other officers to the 5th Ranger Group of the South Vietnamese Army. We had been airlifted from the 3rd Corps area down west of Saigon near the Cambodian border when the NVA Easter offensive struck throughout the country, but we were airlifted up into the Quang Tri province, which was the northernmost part of the attack. And our unit we were airlifted, probably about the 4th of April is when we'd come up there. And we relieved a Vietnamese Marine brigade that had been first in contact up at Dong Ha. And then with other units, we were reinforcing a Vietnamese Army infantry division that had really been hit extremely hard. And over the course of, I suppose it was 2 weeks, we had been taking, we battled very hard. We took very, very severe losses, as did other units with us. And finally, toward the end of April, and that date of the 20th of April may not be exactly correct. Mom and I are still trying to sort through that, because it was probably when the 3rd Division really pretty much fell apart. They had made an order to for withdrawal of the Americans that had been associated with the division. Some, probably about 120 or so, were assembled in Quang Tri City at the Citadel, within the city, and they were going to have an air evacuation. My unit, we had already begun moving south as a part of an attack plan to break out of the enveloping encirclement that the NBA were doing on the city of Quang Tri.
Okay.
And when that order came over our radio that with Americans were to withdraw to the city, we knew that our presence was going to be more important to try to help our unit as they were accomplishing their mission. And I'd already known that my commander was a reliable and a good soldier, and that he was dedicated to the mission, and he would never abandon me. And I knew that at this time, there was no way we were going to be leaving him. We were basically, the American units in Vietnam had all been withdrawn, with the exception of a few, particularly Air Force assets that were providing air support, and some helicopter units that had come up into the northern part. And so, as Americans, we were really, with our unit, we were their only lifeline for external support at that time, and we were not going to leave them.
Right. Can you tell me? And I know this is pretty emotional, but could you tell me about your counterpart? Like when he knew that your orders were to leave. I mean, what did you see in his eyes?
He had gotten word over his command radio net. He'd been informed by other commanders that the American advisors were pulling out. And so he and I just had a very short face-to-face conversation, and I told him that we knew that order, but we were certainly not going to leave him.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, Mom, can you tell us, and as you wrote this, it was from your side of the world, can you tell us what was going on in the initial call to prayer?
Oh, boy. Well, you can imagine that the airwaves were full of everything that was going on in the northern part, in Dong Ha and Quang Tri. So we knew that your dad was in a very precarious situation. And not only my prayer group going to that, but several events that followed. Do you want me to go into those?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was Friday night. The news was particularly bad. It was very negative and for us as Americans, and kind of put all of us on a very shaky ground. And so going to bed that night was difficult if we got any sleep. The next morning, my mother knew about a tea of the Christian ladies in Tulsa that was going on. I don't think I had been invited to it, but she took me with her.
Yeah.
And here I was with, I don't know, over 100 ladies, most of them knowing Dad's story just because of Mom and other people wanting prayer for the whole time. And so we ran into all kinds of people that were, how's Kenny doing? And normally it was, he's okay, continue to pray for him. But that morning it was, he's in trouble, pray. And so I think between Mother and me, we probably hit most of those ladies, which I would think probably went home to their families and their churches and got prayer going for your dad.
Yeah.
This is kind of difficult, as you can tell, for me to think about again.
Yeah.
A Christian friend in Biloxi called me on Saturday and told me that she had been awakened by God Friday night and was told to begin a 3-day fast and prayer at midnight on Saturday. So that would have been Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. She was to fast and pray. A little bit later, I found out that my friend on the West Coast had been called to pray and fast for 3 days. Hers was to start at 10 p.m. on Saturday, which I thought it was kind of fun that God knew the time zones.
Yes.
And later on, after Dad's rescue, a lady called from Tulsa and said that she had been told to pray and fast for Dad Saturday midnight for 3 days, not for Dad, for that good-looking young man she had seen on television.
That was someone you didn't know at all.
No, she was just awakened and told to pray.
Yeah, she had seen Dad on TV, and then God woke her and said to pray. I never realized, Mom, during all this time, I had it a little bit backwards. I thought that they were awakened. I knew they were awakened at the same time, and I thought that began the 3 days fast. But you're saying they were awakened at the same time, and they were told to begin to fast and pray like the next day? Is that right?
You're correct with the latter part. And I think probably, Steve, I found later, after I talked to you about it on your recording, I found minutes of when I had taken notes, and that's when I realized that they were awakened but told to begin the fast on Saturday night.
Oh, okay. Well, and Mom, can you tell us the two women that we did know? Is Brenda Weems one of them, or was that someone else?
Yes, that was Brenda from Biloxi.
Oh, okay.
And she was just desperate in her conversation. It was interesting to me because it was, "Where's Kenny? What's Kenny doing?" And I said, "He's in Vietnam. What's your husband doing in Vietnam?" And she said, "That doesn't matter. I need to know what Kenny's doing."
Wow.
And it was just so cute of her. She was kind of a new Christian, but boy, did he use her.
Yeah. So that made you a little bit more nervous for somebody to say, "God awakened me and said, pray and fast."
Yes, and I love our Lord because it made my mother mad because she knew that would just alarm me more. But God just gave me this sweet sense of love for Brenda that as a new Christian here, she was experiencing this for Kenny, for your dad.
Right.
And the other girl was Ramona Lawler.
Oh, okay.
Who lived in California at the time. And she lived in Tulsa when Dad was in Vietnam, the first tour. And we had become very much closer than we had in high school just because we were both seeking Jesus.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, she reached out to you just the same thing, just to let you know.
Actually, her mother called me.
Oh, okay.
Because her mother still lived in Tulsa, and she said, "Barbara, I don't want to bother you, but I need to know what's going on with Kenny."
Oh.
And so I said, "Well, he's in Vietnam right now, and in kind of a pretty important struggle." And she said, "Well, Ramona was called to pray and fast," and she said, "Mom, please find out what is going on." So she didn't call me directly like Brenda did, but she went through her mother and said, "Call Barbara and find out what's going on with Kenny."
Yeah, well, it was a local call. So, and then she told you about the timeline and everything? Ramona's mom of saying that she was awakened and told to pray and fast, or did you find that out later?
She told me that she was to pray and fast, but I didn't find out the details of God's message to Ramona until later.
Okay. And this part of the story, it's just interesting the way different parts of a story, speak to someone's heart. For me, and there's more prayer coming, and I know from the past, it seems like the children praying is something that spoke to Mom so powerfully.
Yes.
For me, and we'll let you talk about that after I just share, for me, there's something just fantastic and beautiful and amazing about God waking these three people up at different places across the country, different time zones, or the two different time zones, and still it was the same exact time that just always amazed me. And sometimes I just think, I wonder if God tried to wake somebody else up too. And they just thought,
you do wonder.
And
Yeah.
he probably did, but they simply never, and they probably did pray and
That's
fast,
true.
but that was never communicated to your mom.
yeah, that's true. I bet there were some other people, and there might be somebody out there who just thought, oh, that can't be from God.
Yeah.
That's just too
Exactly.
crazy.
Right.
So, but man, I also just think it's amazing of God the way He includes His people on His plan. Like, God could have done that without anybody praying, without anybody fasting, without any of the children, but He
Right.
wants to include us in understanding, letting us be a part of what He does, and I just think it's beautiful. So,
I do too.
yeah. So, Mom, tell us about Kids for Christ, because like I said, it seems to me like that really stands out to you.
Oh yes, that happened on Monday night. That we were at a Kids for Christ in Tulsa. The Holy Spirit was really moving, and a lot of people wanted their children to be involved somehow in finding Jesus. And so it was a huge group of kids, elementary school age kids. And we had a lady who was writing Christian songs, and she would teach them a song, and they would all sing along and do whatever she told them to. And then we had a really short little talk that I would give, and then a longer talk that one of the men would give. And that particular night, I was all in Vietnam, but I had not shared with any of the other leaders what I was going through. And I gave them a little talk just fine. And when we went to prayer, this is a time you've just got to picture all these children, probably 70, 75 children, in this large Tulsa home sitting on the carpet. And when it came time for prayer, they would lift their little hand, and it usually was, for my dog to come home.
Right.
Or one time, more than once, we had a couple of kids in the same family wanting their parents not to get a divorce.
Yeah.
Or things like that. And all of a sudden, these little prayers were protect Steve's daddy, protect Mrs. Teel's husband, protect Major Teel, protect Kathy's dad. And it went on, I think, as I can recall, and I hope I don't exaggerate, but I think it was 17 or 18 of these little kids from preschool through 6th grade lifting their little hands to pray for Kenny.
Well, yeah.
And
Go ahead.
afterwards, it was interesting as I was walking to the car, just absolutely amazed at what God had done.
Yeah.
One of my co-leaders said, "What in the world was that going on about Kenny tonight?" And I said, "He's really in a lot of trouble." And she was an adult who obviously knew about Vietnam, knew Kenny was in Vietnam, but it just went over her head until those little children prayed for him.
Yeah. Wow.
And let me just interject simultaneously.
Yeah.
Vietnam is 12 hours ahead in time.
Yeah.
And so just that day,
Yeah.
the evacuation of advisors had been started from Quang Tri, from the Citadel, and that day is when my friend Bill Jankowski, who was a forward air controller, had been flying cover for that evacuation, calling in airstrikes to protect the helicopters that were lifting Americans out of Quang Tri Citadel. And after that evacuation had been done, he was overflying. We were able to make radio contact with him, and he could observe the enemy forces that we would have to pass through on our way south out of Quang Tri. And so he began calling in airstrikes on the tanks that were located there and the enemy soldiers. And Bill his aircraft got hit by a surface-to-air missile. And it blew up, and he was able to get himself out the door and parachute and control his parachute to where he then landed where our the Rangers that I was with could bring him into our formation.
Wow.
And so that is really when, pretty much concurrently with when, this preceded just a bit of when the kids that night were doing their prayers.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to come back to you, Dad. Keep on interjecting, especially if you got some correlation with the timeline. Obviously, we want to hear more of your story. And then I want to ask Mom, you mentioned in the prayer works that you wrote, and you wrote that, I want to say about 21 or 22 years ago, Mom, and even 21 or 22 years ago, you said that there were 17 or 18 requests for Major Teel, Kathy's dad, Mrs. Teel's husband, Steve's daddy. So, that seems to be a number that's really stuck in your head. So,
right.
And you talk about, tell us about the Tuesday evening men's Bible study. And then, Dad, I don't know if you're able to correlate with Tuesday. Obviously, these prayers are not always, these prayers all matter and they're all working together. But it'd be interesting to see what correlation, what you were going through. But, Mom, can you tell us about the Tuesday evening men's Bible study prayer?
Okay. That was, I went to the women's group that Tom Moan led. I think I went on Tuesday mornings.
Okay.
And then he would have the same Bible study that night for the men.
Okay.
And afterwards, I heard about the men's, that he was giving the talk, his little teaching, and halfway through it, he stopped and said, wait just a minute. We have really got to be in prayer. I don't know what it is or who it is, but we have got to stop and really be in prayer for somebody. And then as they paused to be in prayer, he said, I know who it is. It's Kenny Teel, and he's in Vietnam, and he's in a lot of danger. And so they prayed for Dad. And then later, and I have no idea what happened to it, but one of my friends was at that prayer meeting and was tape recording the talk and tape recorded the prayers for Dad.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What friend is that, Mom, or who was that? Do you remember?
David Givens.
Okay. David Givens? Okay.
Givens.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you're going to tell us about Grandma Elkins and her prayer at some point, but Dad, can you it doesn't have to be correlated, but can you kind of walk us through some
It's pretty close.
Okay.
Once Bill had joined us, there were, our Air Force does a great job on search and rescue, and they had tried to arrange rescue to pick him up on that late afternoon, evening, but they'd suffered, a number of aircraft had been shot down in the area, and they simply had to defer. And what they do is they organize teams which would consist of, maybe 2 to 4 fixed-wing aircraft, A-1E Sky Raiders that would fly suppressive fire, and then typically a 2 Army helicopter lift would be available to come do the ground pickup while they were supported. But they couldn't do that on that particular time because it had been too hot, too many losses already. And so we discussed, my counterpart and I, we talked about what our plan was from where we were. We knew we were going to be pretty well exposed on where we were to enemy artillery, and that we needed, Bill had already called in airstrikes, and we thought, well, we could try to cross, there was a river that was a very significant point that if we could infiltrate and get across the river, we could take advantage of the disruptions that Bill's airstrikes had brought in, and we could go ahead and advance across the river and make our way farther south. And so the decision was made that Bill, we were certainly, he said, you need to go with us. And of course, he was very then happy than that, rather than. And with us, when I say we had a very small advisory team, my assistant was Captain Joe Berkson, and another assistant, First Lieutenant Steve Nahey. They had been with me a very short time, but really very solid soldiers.
Yeah.
And we began moving then in darkness to advance. But it turned out we ran into a bit of an ambush, had some machine gun fire that caused us to get fragmented, to include the command group, my counterpart, his deputy, his operations officer, and others. We got separated, and we wound up then after, I guess, Joe and Steve had really laid down quick suppressive fire that knocked out a machine gun that was only, I don't know, 10 or 15 yards away from us, that we, at night then, we hunkered down on the north bank of this river to kind of collect ourselves and get reoriented and make a plan about what was going to be next.
Okay.
And Bill, in this time then, he was in communication with the Air Force Search and Rescue Operations people, and we talked about then an air evacuation they would try to arrange on the following day. And during that night, Bill could call in some airstrikes. We could hear tank engines as the NBA would crank up their engine during the night, just keep batteries charged and that sort of stuff. And we pretty much thought that trying to cross the river was not going to be the best course of action. And Joe had been he'd told me he'd been classed in Ranger School as a weak swimmer, so I didn't want to take any chances with that. And so our decision was we would try to backtrack through that jungle area to where we could get into a suitable area for the search and rescue people to come make a lift off. So during that night is when we began our exfiltration, and I would move off, I don't know, 100 meters or so through the jungle till I knew I had a little safe route. Then I'd go back and get our guys and bring them to where I was, and then I'd go off one more time to try to find a path through that area, and then go back and get them. And then
Can you explain? I mean, how do you go 100 yards at a time? I mean,
well, I would lead my little group really was Joe and Steve, my advisory team, Bill Jankowski, the forward air controller.
Yeah.
We had two Vietnamese with us. One was the interpreter that had been assigned, and the other was it's classified. Anyway, another Vietnamese. He was a laborer that was assigned to help us with toting stuff, helping us build bunkers and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So I would find what would seem to be a relatively safe place for them to remain while I went by myself to try to find, where's the next safe place that we could get on our way trekking out through the area. And then once I found that, I'd come back and lead them to where I had been, and then I would go off to find another leg of the journey to get back into where we could be lifted. And then the final one I could find there was away from the wood line of the jungle where there was actually a burial ground that we went to and hid in. We were not under direct observation, but we could have been. So we stayed low during that period until air rescue could be arranged to come in that following that afternoon. So that's probably fairly close to the time that your mom is in her Monday Bible study.
Yeah.
Because we're 12 hours ahead of her.
Right.
And so it's Tuesday for us. And
And Dad, I'm just trying to get a little bit better picture. So when you're going 100 yards at a time, are you crawling? Are you walking?
I'm walking very stealthily. I'm walking, and we're walking very stealthily. We don't want to make any noise. We want to be alert to any enemy positions because we knew that they had enemy on that side of the river as well. That's what we had encountered initially that had caused us to get fragmented from the main body of the Ranger Group Command Group.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're not doing low crawl. We're trying to make haste because we wanted to get there while it was still darkness.
Okay.
To where we could get into where we could conceal ourselves in a open area that it would be possible for helicopters to get in.
Okay.
So we were trying to make haste as much as we could while still being very stealthy and not make noise or not be observed or encounter any enemy.
Right. Okay. Wow. And I just want to back up real quick because there's a lot more to the story, so I want you to keep going. But just thinking back to when you got to the river and you realized that Joe was classified a poor swimmer, I feel like I feel like a lot of people would have said, well, just try the best you can, Joe, rather than going back through. I mean, I just think it's amazing that, you know, as a group, you said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not, I mean.
Well, yeah, and the principal thing is we knew there were very significant enemy forces on the south side of the river.
Okay.
If we'd even.
Oh, okay.
You know, you don't know exactly what you're going to run into on the south side of the river. On the north side of the river, we'd already encountered some, but it was not like going through a tank regiment or something like that. I mean, but
wow.
We knew there were large forces on the south side of the river. Bill had observed those while he was calling in airstrikes on them during the daylight.
Oh, yeah.
And we didn't know exactly the depth of the river. And so the chances of crossing that into, we had a better shot at getting a rescue done by heading back generally through the direction that we had come.
Okay. All right. So you find this landing area, which is a burial ground area.
Well, the burial ground, you know, some gravestones there, and then adjacent to it, a flat area that would be possible for helicopters to land. And there were wooded areas around it, but they were at a sufficient distance that perhaps with air suppression, even if the enemy had come up to that area, we would still be able to get in and out.
Okay. All right. So do you want to tell us about that, or is it time to check with?
That lift, aircraft came in, laid down suppressive fires around any of that immediate area that could observe us. 2 helicopters landed. I sent Joe Berkson and the 2 Vietnamese onto the lead. Took Steve Nahey and Bill Jankowski and myself. We loaded up on the other one. And the tragic part of this is the pilots were incredibly brave, both of them, all of these air crews. But instead of breaking the way that we had wanted them to do, which would have avoided the bulk of the enemy forces, they lifted off and were overflying the river and the enemy forces that were south of the river. And really tragically, they really worked to gain altitude rather than flying treetop level, which had become pretty much the practice up in with air defenses of the NBA. You pretty much had to go treetop level on helicopters. And so as we were climbing, I think it was Bill Jankowski that was trying to bang on the co-pilot and pilot in our aircraft, trying to tell him to get low and to go a different way. But what we could see, Joe's helicopter got struck by a surface-to-air missile. We could see it disintegrate and fall to the ground, and it was real clear that there were not going to be any survivors of Joe's helicopter.
Yeah.
And our helicopter got hit by machine gun fire, and our pilots were very skillful in being able. There's a process known when a helicopter loses the power of its engine, the helicopter pilot can still do what's called auto rotation and maintain some lift to get yourself some distance. And so our helicopter was able to get some distance away from where we'd been struck and where Joe's helicopter went virtually straight down. And so we did what was a controlled crash landing into a rice paddy in hostile territory. And so there we waited for some time while our aircraft had, of course, reported that one was down and that they were down. And there was a helicopter pilot. There was a former one of the bases that had been U.S. base of the 101st Airborne Division before they redeployed, is where assets had been pulled up to help, particularly helicopter assets had been pulled up to try to help with operations. The North attack helicopters to try to go after enemy tanks and other scout aircraft, everybody trying to find where the enemy was and make to hold defenses. Really, the whole objective by this time was to keep the NVA, which had already taken the city of Quang Tri, was to keep them from advancing and being able to take the capital city of Hue. That was the big effort, was to build a defensive line that would stop that.
Okay.
And so anyway, that's funny, as we talked with a lot of the participants in it, the different perspectives on exactly how that next phase of the rescue made. But my belief is that I have it. You know how you are. You know your story is right. My belief is that it was a lone pilot in a light observation helicopter who happened to be flying in that area, heard the Mayday, and found us. And his little helicopter was, the max capacity really is 4 people.
Yeah.
There was only one helicopter pilot. He didn't have anybody with him. And my recollection firmly in my notes of that time and what I had passed to your mom and when I finally was able to telephone her is that all 7 of us that had been on this Huey, there was a pilot, a co-pilot, a crew chief, and a door gunner, and then the 3 of us, myself, Steve Nahy, and Bill Jankowski, we crowded in and on that helicopter until that helicopter pilot was able to generate enough power to lift off. And initially he couldn't. It was way, way underpowered for that load that he was carrying. So the door gunner and the crew chief, who had brought their machine guns with them from the down Huey, they tossed those. There was some other stuff that was in the light observation helicopter. Anything that could be jettisoned was jettisoned, and the guy miraculously, in my opinion, was able to generate the power to get us lifted off. And when you talk to Bill Jankowski, he's got a different perspective.
Yeah.
Steve Nahy's perspective is different. The co-pilot of the Huey, his perspective is different. I wonder how anybody ever gets an eyewitness account of anything.
Yeah.
But my firm recollection is that little helicopter managed to get us to safety at one of these former Army bases where the helicopter, the aviation battalion, had their temporary headquarters, and where we rendered our reports and had to sadly, along with the Huey people, tell the aviation guy that there were not going to be any survivors of that Joe's helicopter that had been hit by hit by the missile and had disintegrated and went straight down.
Yeah. And we'll talk about Joe and his daughter Lauren in just a minute.
Okay.
But and I know the marksman is brilliant over here. I don't know if he's put up some of the pictures or not while we've been talking. I don't see them, but marksman is on it. And I know there'll be one of you and meeting us in Hawaii, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that was an earlier one. That was on
okay.
my first tour when
Okay.
you guys were very small.
Right.
And that was I was an advisor with Fifth Infantry Division of the Republic of Vietnam, and sometime 8 or so months into my tour, I had the opportunity to take R&R, rest and recreation, and bless Grandma and Grandpa Elkins. They had decided that Hawaii was an option for me to go for R&R, and they would get you all and themselves to meet me in Hawaii for R&R.
Yeah.
And so that picture is of
gotcha, from
you all meeting me
1968.
at the airport at Honolulu.
Yeah.
Mom's got a story about that too. That there are stories all the way about these things when families are trying to get together.
Right. Okay, well, before we get to that, Mom, let me just ask you to kind of go back to Grandma Elkins, because that seems kind of at the end of your story of the prayer and intercession time. You had last told us about the men's Bible study and the teacher announcing it's Kenny Teel, a young officer in Vietnam. He's in trouble, and the prayers continued. And then you said later that night, Grandma Elkins, what can you tell us?
Grandma Elkins, of course, was in prayer 24 hours a day for all this time, too.
Yeah.
And she let me know that she had received a scripture, and it was joy shall come in the morning.
Yeah.
And it did at 2:15 a.m.
2:15 Wednesday morning, Dad was safe.
Yes.
Yes, and Psalm 35, joy comes in the morning. Yeah, beautiful. All right. Mom, did you want to tell us the story that Dad is alluding to? I'm not sure exactly.
Oh, that's just kind of a silly one. It'll be a short one.
Oh, good. Let's
He was supposed to come in on an early flight on such and such a day. And so rather than waking up the kids and getting them dressed and everything, my dad, your grandpa, took me down to the airport to meet him. And so all these soldiers came off and no Daddy.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Finally, my dad and I were standing there, and here came the chaplain and another guy with him that had a notebook and asked me who I was supposed to meet.
Oh, gosh.
And, of course, what's going through your heart is something happened to him, and he's not coming to Hawaii. And he said, took Dad's name and all that kind of stuff down, and then when they looked through the book, he wasn't able to get on that flight. He'll be in this afternoon at 4:30 or something.
Oh, gosh.
So I knew that I still had a chance to have my reunion with him, and so that's when you kids went with me and Grandma and Grandpa down to meet Daddy. Is that picture?
Oh, man. Okay. That's, wow.
And I guess my point on all this is I tell everybody that we understand when one serves, the whole family serves. And really, you all go through an awful lot of stuff. And we're just grateful for the families that serve alongside the men and women in all of our armed forces.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Dad. Thank you. And Dad, maybe to close out, Mom and Dad, if you want to tell us, obviously so tragic for Joe, but there's more to the story in terms of this connection that you all have made with his daughter, Lauren. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Mom, you tell.
And you were part of that.
Oh yeah, you were the first link.
She found you on Facebook and messaged you. Did your dad serve in Vietnam? And so, see, the whole family does serve.
Right.
I don't know why she couldn't find us on Facebook, but she couldn't. She found you. So thanks, Steve.
Yeah, this was, and I want to say, I know I've learned later from Bill Jankowski that just as everybody in the States was praying crazily,
yes,
he asked me when we got to visit last year, he came through Amarillo, and he said, were you praying that night? And I said, oh, yes, I was. And he said, I was too. He said he had a mission on Easter morning, and he'll tell you about this was a month before this, where
Yeah.
he'd been at his chapel at Da Nang before flying a mission on Easter morning, but it had really hit him then when we were on the riverbank that he was praying just as hard as I was that we wanted to get back home to families. And I don't doubt at all that Steve Nahy was praying and that Joe Berkson was praying and that people. But as you said, God doesn't always answer those prayers affirmatively. It did for Bill and Steve and me, but not for Joe. And so it was 3 years ago. Lauren was 10 months old when her dad was killed in Vietnam, and so she didn't even have the memories that you had.
Right.
And she became connected with a group that's called Sons and Daughters in Touch. These are children whose moms or dads, their names are on the granite wall, the black granite wall at Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and they meet, typically I think it's on Memorial Day. And 3 years ago, one of her friends that she'd encountered in Sons and Daughters, they touched their moms and dads' names on the wall.
Yeah.
And they support one another, and they remember, and they are great supporters. And she asked Lauren what she knew about her dad, and she said, I really didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Do you know any of the guys that served with him? She said, well, I really don't. And the woman said, you really need to track them down because those guys are getting old, and they're not going to be around for a lot longer. And so it was then that Lauren got motivated to begin trying to track those of us that she'd seen names. She'd done some exploration and had found some amazing resources through Vietnam archives and had found names attached to after-action reports and began in the process, I want to talk to these people. And that's when she reached out to you, and you messaged and asked, and I said, of course. And that then Mom and I had a beautiful, beautiful, heart-wrenching telephone conversation with Lauren and began a communication where she could send some of his military records are kind of hard to decipher, and so I was able to tell her what he had done even before the time that he had joined our advisory team, and could give her some insights into what a terrific soldier and what a great friend he was and what a brave soldier he had been. And then Lauren, 2 years ago, your mom and I got to meet her in person. Now, that may be a photo that the marksman would have up because
picked up on that.
Lauren had been she's been so active not only in Sons and Daughters in Touch, but in Gold Star families and in support of wounded warriors. Everybody from Joe's Vietnam area all the way up through the Gulf War in Afghanistan in supporting families that have lost service members. And she had learned of Gold Star family memorial monuments that were being built around the country. And the impetus had come for that from he was now the last surviving Medal of Honor winner from World War II. Herschel Woody Williams, who he won the Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor, for his service in Iwo Jima as a young guy operating a flamethrower and rooting out Japanese out of bunkers during the Battle of Iwo Jima. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and then years later, actually I think I was looking it up, that in 2010 he formed a Woody Williams Medal of Honor Education Foundation that was dedicated to honor Gold Star families. And he and his grandsons had maybe helped him design a particular memorial that local communities can arrange the funding, the placement, and all. Woody and his grandsons travel around the United States to attend groundbreaking, dedication ceremonies, and really encourage the honoring of Gold Star families. And so Mom and I learned that Lauren was working with the city of West Palm Beach, Florida, to find the appropriate place, a beautiful park in downtown West Palm Beach, to raise the money to get corporations and individuals and others and organizations to fund this great memorial. And so it was in September of 2 years ago that Mom and I got to travel to West Palm Beach and to meet Lauren in person, and her husband and family from Texas that had joined to help in this remembrance of her dad and other Gold Star families and their losses. And Lauren, one of the things that impresses me so much is, a lot of people, you have a loss, and the loss is what dominates, and Lauren is one that just shows you the great resilience and courage of people that will overcome loss by building on the strengths that they have and help others and support others.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really, Mom and I both are just so proud of Lauren and what she's accomplished, and thankful that her husband, Mark, so supportive of all of her efforts to do that now, not just West Palm Beach, but throughout the state of Florida. And
she's amazing.
Yeah, she is really, really amazing. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that as well as part of the story. We're about to close down this episode, but I just want to ask you, either of you, both of you, if there's something else you just feel you need to say.
Prayer works.
Prayer works.
Yeah. Prayer works, and we're just so grateful for the men and women who serve, for the families that serve behind them, for the people that I just say our country is so blessed by the families that develop such incredible young men and women who are willing to serve to defend freedom, that will serve and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we are very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, that is well put. Thank you, Mom and Dad, so much for sharing this story that's impacted my life and many others and needs to impact some others. And today what I want to ask you is, who do you need to pray for? Prayer works. Prayer makes a difference if God is involving us. So sometimes we just need to stop and say, all right, who do I need to pray for? And maybe it is for a military family. Maybe it is for somebody serving in the military. Maybe it's your neighbor. Maybe it's somebody who is suffering from PTSD because they served our country. Maybe it's, I don't know. I know who God is putting on my heart and mind. And I don't know what God is putting on yours and your spirit, but I do think if you'll just stop and pause and say, okay, God, I know prayer matters. We talk about that as Christians all the time, but we don't always act as if it matters. Well, it matters, and it matters in my life, and it matters in yours. So I'm praying that God reveals to you someone that you need to be praying for, and it's an honor and a blessing. Just imagine that. For me, it's this may not be for you, but for me, it's being in a boxing ring and being in the corner and just praying for somebody that's in the middle. And maybe it is a military sort of situation, but maybe it's just a spiritual fight that they're going through, a struggle, and they're in the middle of the ring and they're fighting. They're fighting against the lies of the enemy. They're fighting, and you're in the corner and you're praying and you're with them and you're for them. And when they get a break and they come to that corner, you get to encourage them and love them and tell them they're fighting the good fight. They're fighting the good fight of faith, but you keep interceding and praying. That's what God has called us to do. What a beautiful gift that he would allow us. He could just be the God who says, no, I've got this. I'm going to do what I want to do. He includes us, the people that he loves, as part of his plan, as part of his mission. So who do you need to be praying for today? We close this show. You can share with me if God has spoken to you about someone that you need to pray for that you already have been praying for. I know we got prayer warriors out there, and you're like, Steve, I've been praying for this person and that person. You can email me, steve@verybold.com, and I'll join you in that prayer. And I'll keep praying for that one that God has put on my heart and I see another and another, and I just keep praying for them. So this is how we close, and I just want to say, hey, love you, Mom and Dad. You're everybody's favorite people. That's why I had the marksman put your picture up right away, because everybody loves Mom and Dad, Ken and Barb Teel, the real Ken and Barbie. And we love you too. I love you so much, and just thank you for who you are to so many people, and who you are in the kingdom of God, and who you are in my life. Just incredible people. So love you guys. And maybe we've lost their phone connection now. That is hilarious. Thank you, Jesus, that it lasted for 2 episodes, so they can catch this at the end, and Marksman will clean it up, but not for Facebook and not for YouTube. I want to just tell you that we have a great hope, and we have a great and mighty God who is intricately involved with us and using us. And we want to just remember that hope. It's real. I don't know what your story is, what your testimony is, but I know you've got one. And if you've forgotten it, it's time to remember what God has done in your life. Instead of thinking about the things that we think he hasn't done, it's time to focus and say, what about the things he has done? Remember those things today. The Apostle Paul, that's what he was all about every day, remembering that. He said this in 2 Corinthians 3:12. It's why this podcast is called Very Bold Radio and Podcast. It's why this ministry is called Very Bold Ministries. He said this, therefore, since we have such a hope, we are very bold.